Recording.
All right, so today I've got Mr. Mike Davis on a Zoom call with me. Apologies about, I don't know if you guys can hear the piano noise from upstairs. My roommate's doing a Mother's Day stream. I got Mike Davis
Nice.
on a Zoom call. He is the head kind of operator of Concept Studios, which he is here to talk to you about some of what they do and also what he does when he's mastering tracks and what his kind of studio process is. So, Mike, what is Concept and what are the services that you have provided and currently provide?
First of all, thanks for having me on for this interview. It's an honor, and it's good to see you again during this COVID thing. So Concept Jewel, I've always wanted to kind of encapsulate a lot of different musical styles in the work that I do in the industry. And so Concept Jewel kind of started off as a record label, and kind of through that process of being a so-called record label, I kind of found out all the things that being a record label requires. And in that process, I basically just kind of took on all the duties that that are that are required of a record label in terms of kind of the production end of things, and doing some PR stuff as well, and actually acting as a label for people to put on their music. So it's they'll put Concept Jewel on their records, and it becomes kind of a collective at that point. And ultimately, that's what it became, and that's what its true DNA was kind of a music collective. And it still exists as that in a lot of ways, but at this point, it's more become a kind of a name for just the general production process that I'm at the helm of, and I just kind of call it Concept Jewel Studios. And it's a little bit more specific to the production side of things, which I think is good. And then kind of every other aspect of it can be handled by other parties, or still be, I could still be involved in them, but the actual studio and production elements, the production, the music, the recording, the mixing, the mastering, that's all kind of under the Concept Jewel umbrella now. So
very cool. And so you just mentioned that you do a lot of the mixing and mastering stuff. So what we're going to focus on a little bit right now is mastering, specifically. So in your opinion, kind of what is mastering? What is the purpose of that final step of mastering a track?
Well, so the way I see it, and from what I've gathered in my research, is it's taking that mix that is done by the mixing engineer and is kind of signed off on by the artists themselves, and just bringing out just a little bit more shine from it, and maybe a little bit more punch, and also ensuring that the volume levels are of a standard with all of the other music that's coming out in the industry. So these days you've got all these streaming services. They're doing audio normalization, which basically ensures that all the volumes between all the different tracks is it's sounding pretty similar. So if you threw everything on a playlist together, going from one song to the next song by a completely different artist, it wouldn't be so drastically different. But it's not just volume; it's also sound character. It's the soundscape, and hearing what the mixing engineer and the production engineer, everyone in the process, trying to look at it as a whole, and kind of just bring out that final shine, that finishing touch, that makes it a truly professional sounding stereo file,
Mm,
and then from there it gets sent to whatever format. And another part of mastering is actually formatting the final the final file that's to be sent to wherever, because there's a different mastering process for vinyl than there is for sending to streaming services, than there is to sending to CD production.
mhm.
So it's really just kind of you bring out that final shine, and then you ensure that the audio is going to uh, it's going to be as similar sounding on whatever platform it ends up on
Right.
as it is when you're actually mastering it. So it's those kind of like finishing touches things that just prepares it for the actual market. So
Gotcha. Very cool.
yeah.
Um, so as far as like what kind of equipment, I guess software more specifically that you're using. So what DAW and what plugins, if there's any external plugins that you like to use for like compression or any
Mhm.
stereo widening or anything like that, like kind of go through what you're working with when you go to master a track.
Yeah. So the DAW that I use is Bitwig, which was developed by, I believe, two of the original developers of Ableton. And they have Bitwig has a lot of really solid native plugins that I
Mm,
like to use in the mastering process. Like they have um, they have a mid side splitter, which basically splits the audio channels into the audio that's the exact same in the left and right speaker versus the audio that's actually out of phase or different in the left and right speaker. So that's the side channel, and the mid channel is the same. So that can give you kind of a control over the final master. So like maybe something is blaring in the sides, but it's not actually blaring in the mids, or maybe the bass is too strong in the sides, so you just kind of bring it down so that there's more of a centered body to the track. There's also a stereo splitter, which just splits it left and right channels. And
mm,
sometimes something's in the left channel that it's not in the right, so you can kind of like tame that. Um, and then my biggest go-to tool for mastering is just the Ozone suite. So
mhm,
they have a bunch of different plugins, and I think there's like 12 or 13 different plugins that you can throw onto the chain. Uh, I usually start off with uh, just an initial EQ, probably bringing out, uh, doing like a high pass, getting rid of like the super low frequencies, depending on the genre. But like most genres don't, they don't really like want any sub frequencies, and that can affect the amount of volume that's eventually going into like the compressor and the limiter. So that can really clean things up. And then sometimes multi-band compressors, which basically split everything into different bands, and you can kind of adjust how compressed you want the bass, the low mids, the upper mids, or the treble frequencies to be. And then tape saturators are really good. They can kind of like, what they basically push the volume and distort it a little bit. Uh, and it kind of pulls the mix together in a lot of ways. Like where adding that kind of saturation can kind of fill in the gaps, and add some tails to like add tail resonance to things that aren't as resonant without it. And it kind of like it, everything isn't so like discernibly separate from like every instrument isn't so discernibly separated. It becomes more of like a one unit of sound when you run things through a saturator like that. And then you can do dynamic EQs, which it's like if there's too much S or like sizzling frequencies up top, you can kind of tame that with a dynamic EQ, which basically you set a threshold, and above that it can duck. And then finally the limiter. So, you know, generally the last thing in the mastering chain is the limiter,
Yeah.
which basically you can push the volume and ensure, like the limiter kind of ensures that the final master is going to end up being of the volume dynamics that's of whatever standard that you're mastering for. So like with Spotify, this thing called LUFS, their target is for -14 decibels of LUFS, which basically means the average volume of the whole song is -14 when accounting for all of the entire length of the song. So, and then you set the highest decibel. It's like you don't want to go above -1, or else it might distort if they have to turn your song up or whatever.
Right.
And then I'm trying to think of what else I sometimes use in mastering. I mean, sometimes I'll throw reverb on. Like I'm mastering an album right now where a lot of the songs feel kind of dry and just like too in your face.
Mhm.
I've been just throwing a little bit of reverb on everything, and it kind of has that similar effect that the saturator has, in terms of like making everything sound a little bit more cohesive. Like all the instruments, they kind of sound more like they were recorded in the same room, or like, you know,
Right.
with a reverb on like that. So
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I've experimented with some of that as well, with the reverb. A lot of the times it's from the soundboard recordings of my live stuff. Because when you're close
yeah,
miking
that
everything, you know, you don't get that room sound where it's echoing around the room. All you get is everything that's just being mic'd right there. So it kind of adds this extra little. It adds an extra feel of, you know, oh, you're standing in the room listening to it versus this
yeah,
is coming directly from the instrument into your face. You know.
exactly. Well, I did that with the your mom's house recording that you guys did. I
Yeah, that's right.
threw some reverb on there, and it's like, you know, like it's one of those things, you know, if you just ask a random person, I mean, a lot of what mastering is, and a lot of what mixing is too, I guess, but like even more so in mastering, it's like all these little subtle adjustments
Mhm.
that, you know, if you asked someone, or even if you showed someone an A and B comparison between the unmastered and the mastered, if it was gain matched, uh, meaning like this sounded the same volume,
Right.
uh, like, you know, they might not be able to tell, but, you know, when you listen to something on all these different sets of speakers, then certain things come out, and you know, you can kind of tame them in the mastering process. But yeah,
Right.
I mean, it's like mastering is a lot of subtlety, you know, it's a lot of
Yeah.
subtlety. And I mean, it's a necessary thing, I think, in a
Mhm.
lot of cases. I mean, sometimes a mix is, I mean, sometimes people mix into like a mastering chain, which, you know, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. It's just, um, you know, if you remove the mastering chain, it could just completely fall apart. Yeah.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
but
Well, from
yeah,
everything that I've learned through, you know, doing my own mixing kind of under your tutelage and trying to learn a little bit more about the mastering, has been that, you know, the mix needs to be solid enough to stand by itself, and then the mastering is only there to enhance and kind of, like you said, get it like industry standard ready to be released out into the
exactly.
market.
Yeah.
Versus if you know, doing it the way that you were just saying, it seems like, you know, when you take away the mastering chain, it seems very likely that a lot of the time the mix won't be able to stand by itself. If you're mixing into a kind of preordained mastering chain, then
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, um, I think, yeah, I think Caleb just got, the, I think, I mean, I've made that mistake before where I've like mixed into a mastering chain. And
uh,
I mean, again, it's like, it's not the worst thing, because like if you take it off and it falls apart, then maybe that's a time for you to like rebuild the mix and learn something new about, you know, how the mix goes into the whatever mastering chain you were using. So I mean,
Right.
it's always it's always a good learning process, but you know, in general, you want to mix and then you want to master.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
but
sweet, man. I think that was everything I needed to go over for today.
cool.
So thanks for joining us once again. This is Mike Davis from Koncept Studios. Also, check out his band Chess at Breakfast if you get the chance. They're real fun, real weird, and it's always a hoot. All right, man. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks.